What if I told you the most powerful military on Earth just ran out of ammunition, and the enemy they were supposed to destroy in days is now stronger than ever? Stick around, because what happened next will blow your mind. Right now, at this very moment, something unprecedented is unfolding in the Persian Gulf. The United States military, the most expensive fighting force in human history, is facing a reality that no one in Washington wants to admit. The air campaign against Iran, that was supposed to be over in 72 hours, has now stretched into its fourth week. And the results are not what you have been told. If you want to understand what is really happening in this conflict and why the consequences could reshape the entire global order, smash that like button and let the algorithm know you are here for the truth. Every click helps cut through the noise and bring real analysis to people who need it. You see, I have been watching this campaign unfold from a distance, and I have seen something I have seen before from air forces throughout history. The Air Force reaches a certain point and it runs out of genuine military targets. And then something predictable happens. They go through this process of trying to justify hitting large quantities of infrastructure that have no real military utility or value at all. Why? Because that is what you can see. That is what does not move. So, what are we actually doing right now in Iran? We are engaged in an effort to destroy infrastructure to try and make the population as miserable as possible. But we have not achieved, contrary to what officials are claiming, all these great goals and objectives. And here is where it gets truly alarming. As far as nuclear capability is concerned, whenever this conflict ends, very shortly thereafter, Iran will probably have a nuclear weapon. Think about that for a moment. The real lesson people around the world are drawing from this campaign is simple and terrifying. If you do not have a nuclear weapon, if you are a middle-sized power and you disagree with Israel or the United States, then you run the risk of being attacked. The logical conclusion, you better get a nuclear weapon so that you can deter attacks. So where exactly are these great victories we keep hearing about? Stay with me, because what I am about to reveal will change everything you thought you knew about this war. Now, there is something else that officials keep claiming. They say Iran shut down the Strait of Hormuz, but that is not what actually happened. Lloyd's of London shut it down. Why? Because a war broke out. And why did the war break out? Because we started the war. We caused the Strait of Hormuz to be shut down because no one wants to risk moving their tankers through a war zone. Let me give you some numbers that will make your jaw drop. Before this conflict, 75 oil tankers passed through the Strait of Hormuz every single day. 75. Now we are looking at perhaps 3 or 4. The total shipping traffic has collapsed from over 150 vessels daily to almost nothing. And here is where the global catastrophe begins to unfold. If the fertilizer problem is not addressed pretty quickly, we are going to have famine in 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 months. I am not talking about minor food shortages. I am talking about Africa. I am talking about Asia. Millions of people facing starvation because of decisions made in Washington. But it gets worse. You know, all that advanced microcircuitry being produced in Taiwan, Korea, and Japan, the chips that power everything from your phone to your car to medical equipment, they cannot produce them anymore because they are not getting the helium they need. This is a catastrophe of global proportions, and nobody in Washington seems to have cared. The entire focus was simple. This is what Israel wants, Israel gets. And Israel will never be safe and will never be able to dominate the region unless Iran is destroyed. You hear the words all the time on Capitol Hill. We are taking Iran off the board. Well, right now, I think the opposite is happening. I think this war is setting up a situation where the Gulf Emirates, along with Israel, are probably going to be off the board. And let me explain exactly why. What have we seen so far? We have seen all of these air and missile defenses that have been built fail. Israel is no longer launching anything in response to the missiles that are falling on it. The missile defenses in the Gulf Emirates have not performed to expectation. And the Iranians have made it very clear that once we recommence the air and missile campaign, when we have replaced roughly 11,000 precision-guided munitions that we expended in the previous campaign, they are going to respond in kind. If we hit the desalination plants, if we hit the oil infrastructure, they are going to turn around and do exactly the same thing to the Gulf Emirates. And I need you to understand something critical here. There are over 50 desalination plants on the western side of the Persian Gulf. If you look at Al Jubail, the Saudi port, there is a huge desalination plant that was vital to us during Desert Storm. We were receiving fresh water every day in vast quantities from the time we landed in Saudi Arabia until we left. We could not have done anything without that. Now, here is the haunting detail. 90% of Riyadh's drinking water comes from desalination. If that desalination plant is destroyed, Riyadh will have to be evacuated because there is no water to drink. That same vulnerability repeats itself through the UAE, Bahrain, Kuwait, and so forth. Make sure you are subscribed with notifications turned on because the next part of this story reveals something that should terrify every American. Now, let me tell you about a problem that has been building for years, a problem that very few people have been willing to discuss publicly. America's air defense munitions, the cupboard is nearly bare. There was a report that the Pentagon is locked into a 7-year deal with Boeing and Lockheed Martin to triple production of the PC-3 missiles. Some analysts are saying we are completely out or almost out. There have been reports of PAC-2 munitions found in Kuwait, old stockpiles being desperately searched for. How did we get here? How did the most powerful military in history run out of the basic tools it needs to defend itself? The answer is simple and devastating. Our manufacturing base, whether military or commercial, has atrophied. We have no surge capability. When people think of the United States and its military power, their minds are lost somewhere in the distant past. They think of the arsenal of democracy, when we produced hundreds of aircraft every month, thousands of tanks every year. But here is the reality today. The Chinese can produce 1,000 rocket motors for cruise missiles and ballistic missiles in one day. We are lucky to produce 10 or 15 a week. Let that sink in. 1,000 versus 15. That is the gap we are facing. So how have we gotten away with this for so long? Simple. If you pick relatively unchallenging opponents, you can defeat them, beat your chest, and pretend to be powerful. There is a historical parallel that haunts me. The British Expeditionary Force in 1914. They were good soldiers. They did many things well. But what was the problem? It was a child of imperialism. Britain had been policing an empire for 100 years, fighting weak opponents. General Kitchener's comment at Omdurman in 1899 says it all. Somebody asked him how he achieved such success. He said, "We have the Maxim gun. They do not." He was right. Superior firepower against inferior enemies looks like genius until you face a real opponent. So, who have we attacked in recent decades? Afghans, Iraqi Arabs, people with minimal military equipment, no air defenses, no air forces, no real naval forces. If you pick the right enemy, you can look really good. But Iran is not Afghanistan. Iran is not Iraq. Iran is a fortress. It is an enormous fortress surrounded by mountains with some nasty deserts. The population is not like the populations in the artificially created states of the Middle East. This is a real country with a real identity and an age-old culture going back thousands of years. We wrote this off. We said it would be over in a few days. And now we are learning that we do not commit a force for something it was never designed to do. Now, I want to talk about something that very few analysts are willing to discuss. We are dealing with a completely different kind of warfare now. It is not asymmetric in the way people used to think about it. This is what I call ISR strike warfare. What does that mean? It means taking intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance platforms, overhead satellites, sensors in the environment, even devices on the seabed, and linking all of those through a command structure back to multiple weapon systems designed for standoff attack, intermediate range ballistic missiles, tactical ballistic missiles, drones, and cruise missiles. The ability to see something and within a minute or two decide to attack that target from somewhere inside Iran is revolutionary. The Russians demonstrated this capability over time in Ukraine, and the Ukrainians have lost tremendous numbers as a result. Now we are seeing this employed against us. So when you talk about ground troops, which officials are now discussing, first you have to get them there. They have to arrive without being identified. You still have to concentrate them somewhere. Then you have to transport them out to whatever islands you decide to attack. and then you have to protect them. But our air and missile defenses have not turned out to be very effective. Most of our defensive capability is sitting on destroyers hundreds of miles away from the area where we would put troops. In other words, there is very little evidence for success with these operations because we cannot neutralize the enemy's capabilities. A former Deputy Secretary of Defense wrote something back in 2010 that haunts me today. He made it very clear that if we cannot neutralize this kind of battle space network with all these standoff attack weapons, we are not going to conduct any amphibious operations. We are not going to conduct any air mobile operations. Because if you try, you are going to take unacceptable losses. That warning was issued 16 years ago, and here we are facing exactly that scenario. Stay with me because what comes next reveals who is really making the decisions in this war and why. Now, let me address something that many people wonder about. How did we get into this war? Why did the president make this decision? Here is what you need to understand. The president is a perfectly nice person in private, but like so many of us, we only know what we know. You are talking about someone who does not study or read deeply about strategic thinking or historical experience. His managerial experience in this arena is limited. He is preeminently a marketing genius, a salesman, and you can go back through his career. It is not marked by one long, uninterrupted march to greatness. He has been bailed out several times from total bankruptcy. But here is the key insight. He is absorbed in what I call financial capitalism, which dominates New York City. These are people who do not build things, they do not raise factories, they do not develop products, they trade in money and transaction fees. That does not prepare you for the international system. And if you believe you are the smartest person in the room, you want everybody to agree with you. You look for people who agree with you, not people who disagree. And so you end up surrounded by advisors who tell you what you want to hear. Winston Churchill was similar in some ways. He dismissed expert opinion if it did not appeal to him, if it stood in the way of something he wanted to do, and he tended to hold in high regard people of his class, either aristocrats or the very wealthy. The president has military advisors who are overwhelmingly airmen, pilots, whose world is dominated by aircraft and missiles. People who take it as an article of faith that if you do the targeting right, you are going to win. Even though we have decades of experience suggesting that approach does not work against a determined, capable adversary. Now, here is the uncomfortable truth about who is really driving this policy. The entire focus was Israel. This is what Israel wants, Israel gets. That has been the calculation all along. But there is a problem with this approach. I do not think the president has a great deal of latitude in his decision making on this issue. Israel remains the sticking point in everything. And here's what keeps me up at night. Will the Israelis, when they figure out that the game is up, when it becomes infinitely clear that the campaign has not achieved its objectives, are they going to push the panic button? Are they going to turn to the use of a nuclear weapon? Or are they going to come to terms with reality? Because remember what this is really about. This is about greater Israel. That is why they are in southern Lebanon. That is why they are in Syria. That is why they are trying to empty the West Bank. They have already killed and displaced millions from Gaza. Some Israelis are very unhappy about all this and do not want to live that way. But they appear to be in the minority. The majority want absolute dominance. And if they cannot get that, they either have to leave or risk the most terrible option of all. A prominent Chinese analyst said something recently that carries tremendous weight. He said the moment Israel uses a nuclear warhead against any country, it will be considered the number one enemy of humanity. It will be the demise of Israel as a state, as a regime, as a country. That is not an idle threat. That is a statement of how the world would respond, and it should give everyone pause about where this conflict could lead. Now, let me tell you what I believe is coming next and why it matters for everyone watching. The ascendant power in the Middle East is China. That is obvious to anyone paying attention. And we are on our way out. We are finished in the Middle East region. The question is, how soon do we leave and how do we leave? I do not see any evidence that any of the bases we have had in the Gulf Emirates will be rebuilt. I would be very surprised if the Saudis permitted us to come back in any strength. In fact, I believe we are going to see tremendous upheaval in the Arab world on the Arabian Peninsula. The people who rule that region are not terribly popular with the people they rule. So, what happens when we leave? This is very dangerous for the Israelis because our presence has been viewed by them as an insurance guarantee that they are going to survive. And here is what most Americans do not realize. We have done everything we can to harm Russia for years, so Iran has now become a proxy through which Russia can harm us. What surprises me is how little the Russians have done, not how much. If I were in their position, I would have done far worse, but neither Russia nor China are interested in a war with us or anybody else. They are interested in doing business. They want to get back to normalcy. Iran is not a vassal of China or Russia. It is being treated as an ally, as a sovereign state. The reason they would intervene would be if it looked like Iran was about to disintegrate, but there is no evidence for that at all. And I think this war has decided that China is going to come into the region. It is going to be invited in, just as it was invited in to settle the disputes between Saudi Arabia and Iran previously. The Chinese have an interest because they draw heavily on all the resources that come from that region. The Japanese and the Koreans will probably welcome that too, because right now they are very upset with us. We have destroyed their economies. Major plants have declared force majeure. They are out, they are done, they are finished. That is our fault. We never consulted anybody. We acted with impunity without discussing anything, without regard to the interests of others. And when it comes to NATO, we should have been out of that alliance over 30 years ago. There was no reason to stay once the former Soviet forces withdrew from Eastern Europe. We should have gotten out of Germany and Central Europe. We stayed because we wanted to repurpose NATO for our interests. These were seen as vassal states. We treated Europe the way the Romans treated the Greek city-states. Provide us legions, give us troops, and then you can join us, but you have no sovereignty. Right now, the Europeans have figured that out, and that is exactly what has happened in the Middle East. We treated the Gulf Emirates as dependencies for our own monetary gain. NATO is going to go away. NATO died on the battlefields of Ukraine. All this talk about intervening on Ukraine's behalf was always empty. The time for NATO to act against Russia, if it wanted to act at all, was to rush to the Dnieper River and set up a line along the historic easternmost border of the Western world. They could have said to the Russians, "What you do east of the river is your affair, but here is where our interests begin." We did not do that. We did nothing except keep giving weapons and material while 1.5 to 1.8 million Ukrainian troops died. But the little regime in Kyiv can still launch drones. They just launched one that went all the way to St. Petersburg and destroyed an oil refinery. The real question now is, when is this going to end? And here is what I can tell you. If you want to answer that question, you have to look at the global economy as well as the United States financial position. Our position is very fragile right now. All you have to do is look at the bond market. The 10-year bond, which is a good metric, is at 4.3 and rising. If that ultimately hits 5%, we have had it. Our debt becomes absolutely unmanageable, unsustainable. The stock market has not crashed yet because officials have been telling the marketplace prolifically about the true state of the war, about imminent peace, about great successes. But you can only do that for so long before people finally figure out it is nonsense. Why would you need another 3 weeks of air and missile campaign plus ground troops if you were so successful during the last 3 weeks? It is absurd. Everybody is figuring that out. People are gullible, but at some point they do wake up. I am not certain this will be over in a month, but I think we will reach the point where we do not have any more munitions. We will have exhausted much of our conventional military potential, and no one wants to see a nuclear weapon employed. What we do not know is whether we have any real influence over Israel. Can we prevent them from turning to nuclear weapons as it becomes clear that this approach has failed? I think we have already lost the strategic initiative. The good news is that neither Russia nor China want a war with us. They want normalcy in business. The next 2 or 3 weeks will tell us whether the goals that were set were ever even possible. Because I think what we are going to try to do is cause the disintegration of Iran. and I do not believe that is achievable. Extending this war by another 2 or 3 weeks is going to have a profoundly negative impact on the global economy. We could see a very steep recession. Part of the world, maybe a large part of it, will go into a depression. If officials were to stop now, they might escape the worst consequences, but not if this extends for another 2 or 3 weeks. And here's the final question everyone should be asking. How long before there is a change in leadership? Members of the ruling party are already expressing dissent. They too are culpable for dragging us into this conflict, but they will act like they have no shared guilt and they will pin it on the decision makers. I think if this war extends much longer, the political consequences will be severe. The midterm elections loom, and the assumption is that both houses could change hands. The days of the current approach are numbered if this war continues. So, what is the bottom line? We are watching the end of an era. The American century in the Middle East is coming to a close. The question is not whether we leave, but how we leave and what we leave behind. The Strait of Hormuz will eventually be governed by some kind of treaty, probably managed by regional powers with Chinese and Russian involvement, similar to how the Turks have managed the Dardanelles for decades. The Turks treat everybody fairly and nobody complains about their administration. We will not be invited to those negotiations. We have made too many enemies and broken too much trust. The global supply chains that depend on that region will be rebuilt, but under different management. The fertilizer will flow again, the helium will flow again, the oil will flow again, but not under our control. And the great irony is this: the war that was supposed to take Iran off the board may end up taking us off the board instead. The question that remains is whether cooler heads will prevail before this escalates further, whether the decision makers in Washington and Tel Aviv will recognize the limits of military power before they cross lines that cannot be uncrossed. I have seen a lot in my years of studying these conflicts, and what I see now is a military and a political establishment that has fundamentally misunderstood the nature of the challenge they face. They believed their own propaganda about quick victories and technological superiority. They forgot the lessons of history. Iran is not going away. It has survived for 3,000 years. It will survive this too. The question is what kind of world we will live in when the dust settles. And that is something every one of us should be thinking about very carefully. Do not stop here. The world is changing faster than anyone predicted. Click on the next video and join me as we explore more critical developments that will shape the future of global power for decades to come.